Well, you are getting a big boy. Now you're going to recognise my green wall, which I installed this time last year, and it's getting really established with this weather and automatic watering. Everything is growing really nicely, and I do like the way it's framed with these two barrels, one either side. But I have a couple of problems. The first one being that because the barrels are just sitting on earth, when it rains, it all gets splashed up and covers the bottom of the barrel with mud. And what I found with my other barrels is if they sit on grass, then it's a pain to mow up to, and I have to use a strimmer, and that's not really good for the barrel. The second issue I have is at the bottom of the green wall, it looks a bit bare. So today I'm going to install a small raised bed just in front of it and put down some blockwork for the raised bed to sit on and the barrels to sit on, and make it easier to mow around when I've got some grass around them. And I want to do all of this with as little effort as possible, so I'm going to use block paving but not have to do one single cut, and it's all going to be sitting on my special cement stabilised base, so I can enjoy the sunshine rather than be lugging material about, which today sounds like a great plan. To give the garden a bit of variety, I think it's quite nice to have here and there some raised beds just to break things up a bit. And this one I'm building today is about as small as they get. Just one garden sleeper high by 1 wide, that's 8 foot wide, just to finish off the bottom of my green wall. As it will be full of soil, which will obviously be in contact with the sleepers as well as the gravel boards at the back, I take the opportunity to line them with DPM, damp-proof membrane plastic, to prolong their life. And I'm doing it in my favourite way by cutting down some treated 4x2 into thin strips, maybe 3 or 4 millimeters thick, and using these stapled to the board with stainless steel staples to hold the DPM in place. And by doing this with the plastic initially pointing up and then folding it over down onto itself, it gives quite a nice tidy finished look to the top inch or so that will always be visible. And I can tuck this between the soil and the boards all the way down to the bottom and then just backfill against it. I want to install my sleepers on blocks, as I've got some left over from a previous project, and I don't really want them sitting directly on soil, and as I said at the start, it's going to give me a cleaner edge to mow up to. And then I thought if I extend this blockwork on either side, it will then give the barrels quite a nice pad for them to sit on. So the first thing I need to do is to remove enough earth to accommodate the depth of the blocks and sand bedding. The material I dig out, I pile up into the middle where I'll need it later to help fill the raised bed, so there's no point in taking it away. To make sure that I've removed enough soil and to help me level the sand later, I hammer in some steel pins that I can put tape onto to show me the levels required. These pins were originally road pins, which are just 4 foot long steel pins that you use to put up barriers and netting, which I've cut into thirds so they end up at about 400 millimeters or 16 inches long. And then I put a point on them, which makes them easier to hammer into the ground. And they've come in really useful now over a number of projects. So the whole trench is now dug to accommodate my blocks, which are 60 millimeters deep, plus a sand layer of 15 millimeters. The level reference for all my blocks is the joint between the 2 gravel boards that I put in this time last year, which I know is horizontal and pretty much the level that I'm aiming at for this whole area. Although using a line fall on the spirit level, I have actually angled the blocks so the water will tend to flow away from the fence. So that's the end of the excavation. I'm not going to take any more material out because I'm not using type 1 on this. I'm going to be using my cement soil stabilization method. And what that means is I'm going to be mixing this soil with cement to give it strength for the sand and the blocks to sit on. Now the amount of cement I'm going to use is I'm going to be looking at 10 to 15 millimeters layer of cement over this to be mixed in to the top 4 inches of soil. So that gives me a 6:1 or 7:1 cement ratio, which will give me a weak cement mix. Now, if you want it harder, all you have to do is use more cement, but it's also important to mix it really well. So I'm just going to be doing this by hand. But if you've got a base that's you need it a lot stronger, then something like a rotavator would really help mix that up and make sure that you've got a good consistency. It all depends how much cement you want to put in. So this method that I'm using to construct a hard base underneath the blocks is called Cement Soil Stabilisation. If you haven't seen it before, go and check out my video of a couple of weeks ago. I'll put a link in the description below, where I explain it all to you and show you some examples of how to do it. But today I'm using it on this project, which means I don't have to take away any more material, because this will give me a hard enough base for the blocks to sit on. And all I'm doing is spreading pure cement on the surface to a thickness of 10 to 15 millimeters, and then mixing that really well with the top 100 mil or 4 inches of soil. The more cement you mix, the harder the base is going to get. But in this example, I'm only really trying to replicate type 1. I'm not trying to get to a point where I've got concrete under the blocks. So a 10 or 15 millimeter thickness of cement, I think, is just about right in this situation. There's 3 important things with this method. Firstly, the amount of cement. Secondly, it needs to be well mixed. And if you've got a large area, then using something like a cheap small rotavator is really going to help mix that top few inches better than you can probably do by hand. But a small area like this, it's really just not worth it. And I'm just digging it in like I would compost into a flower bed. And the third thing you need to be aware of is the amount of water you put onto it. You need to have enough water in it for the cement to hydrate and start its chemical reaction. But that's not very much. So you don't want to be putting too much in that makes it all mushy and will take days and weeks to dry out, and will eventually give you a lower strength. So really just enough water to make everything damp. And if the soil is already damp, then maybe you don't need to add any water at all. Here it hasn't rained for a little bit, so it's on the dry side. So I just add a touch just to make sure there's enough moisture in there. As well as not having to remove any more material, the other main advantage of doing it this way is cost. For me to bring in enough bags of type 1 to compact the top 4 inches here will cost me around £40–50, whereas spreading half or 3/4 of a bag of cement is maybe £3 to £5 in total. Along the front here, I'm just running one soldier course of blocks for the sleeper to sit on. Once it's well mixed, I level it the best I can and then compact it. Because you've just been digging it up and fluffing up this soil, you really do need to compact it back to where it was originally. And then I do the same on the left-hand side where the future barrel is going to be placed. With the cement added and everything well mixed and then compacted down again, I check the levels, which are fine, and that is essentially my base prepared. So that's essentially it for the base, and the rest of it is just like any other block work. It's just sand, screed, and then block on top. And in fact, you could do that now. The only reason I'm leaving it is so we can see the strength of it before it goes on, but there's no reason why you can't put the blocks on now, as long as you don't really load it. You don't really want it to move around, but you can put the blocks on, which means I don't need to dig out the rest of the material and lug it somewhere. I don't need to lug type 1 in bags, multiple bags, and spread that out and start trying to compact it. So really my job is done. It's like the life of Riley. Cheers.
Lost in the Milky Way, smile at the empty sky, wait for the moment a million chances may all collide. I'll be the guiding light, swimming to me through stars that shine out and call to the sleeping world as they fall to earth.
before I put the blocks in this end, I'll show you the result of the cement stabilised soil. You thought I'd forgotten, didn't you? Come and have a look at this. So this has been 2 days since I laid it, and it's getting some strength, but cement takes quite a bit of time to get strength. Most of the strength comes in the first 1 or 2 months, so this is just going to get harder and harder. It's definitely not concrete, but I'm not looking for concrete. I'm looking for the base that's not going to heave when it goes through the freeze-thaw cycle, and if it gets wet, it's not going to go all muddy. And this is quite hard now. I mean, yes, you can dig it up, but it's quite granular. You can tell that's not normal soil. But I can't spend all day talking about this. If you want to know more details about cement soil stabilisation, go and have a look at my video. The link is in the description below. I need to get on, lay some blocks and make my raised bed.
Cradles and sleepless nights, you breathe in life forever, and stare at the world deep under eider down. So here's your life, we'll find a way.
So all the blocks are in place and to level and in a position where I'm quite happy for them to stay. And what I've done now is just to dig a little trench around the perimeter and just slightly undermine each block, maybe just by 1/2 inch or 3/4 of an inch, so I can get some sand and cement around the outside of the block and just underneath, which will support that free edge and hold them all together. And it's no more difficult than just putting sand and cement in that gap. But what I do like to do once I'm wearing gloves, because I don't like touching cement because of the alkaline content, is just making sure just slightly underneath there, just to support that front edge. And normally I'd use a pointing trowel to haunch this sand and cement up, but there's not much room here, so I'm afraid I'm going to resort to my traditional stick method, which will work just as well. Maybe not quite so professional. That will support that front edge for moving out and moving down, just in case I walk over it or run over it with the lawnmower. So with the timber and the blocks in, making sure I'm using my DPM between the timber and the soil to give the timber some sort of longevity. I fill the bed using my homemade compost, and although my original plan was to have like a fern, mossy type bed here, halfway through planting there seemed to be a complete lack of colour. So I panicked and put in some bedding plants as well, which is a bit of a mixture, but I think it's come out really well. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Remember, subscribe, bell notification, Patreon, all of that sort of stuff. I will see you next time. And what's next?